I think about history as essentially a way of making an argument by telling a story. And what's different from the argument that you make in the story that you tell about history is that it's accountable to evidence. That's what makes it different from another kind of a story. That's why it's nonfiction and not fiction. And one of the things I really loved about writing the essays that make up this book, The Story of America, is really playing with and trying to figure out exactly how to bind a story to an argument. One of the reasons I wrote these essays was to try to explain how history works. History works by historians uncovering evidence and offering up interpretations, conducting an analysis of the evidence, arriving at an interpretation, and then delivering that interpretation either through an argument or a story, or in the way that I try to work by delivering it through both. The power of that interpretation rests on whether or not it advances or challenges or sufficiently refutes previous interpretations. It could be appealing to read just because it's fun to read, but its value as scholarship is contingent on whether it tells us anything new that we didn't already know. So it could be a new discovery, right? There could be a new archival discovery that makes it so important to say, wait, no, we need to now think about it this way, because I just found this document, it changes everything. No, there was a previous draft of the Declaration of Independence, whatever it is. Some magical, wonderful thing. Like, that's the best. It's my favorite kind of thing, is when you find something new. There's an essay in the book about the history of debt, and I wrote this whole account of this guy, John Pintard, who was the founder of the New York Historical Society, but he was in debtor's prison and kept this reading diary, and I went to the New York Historical Society, which has his diary, and a lot of the excitement that I bring to that piece is about finding Pintard's diary and discovering this guy that no one had really written about, and whose life story tells us a lot about how the United States abolished debtor's prison and why we have bankruptcy protection, and why England, for instance, didn't, and how that distinguishes the early United States. But if you don't find something new, there's still often something new to say, but then what you have to deliver is a new interpretation. For the novelty of your interpretation to come across, you need to actually make clear what the older interpretations were. So one of the ways I try to handle that often as a writer is to remember and remind the reader that a lot of the people that we think of as actors in the past were also historians. And so the long debate about, for instance, the founding of Jamestown, the question historians have asked for 2 generations is, was Jamestown a failure or was Jamestown a great success? And we can look at different interpretations and then different pivotal and very wonderfully important scholarly work done in the 1970s and 1980s. But you can go back to John Smith's own account of what happened in Jamestown from his true travels. There's his travel narratives about Virginia. He wrote many different versions of the story of what happened in Virginia. And remember that Smith himself was a historian who's really charged with answering the question, was this settlement, which he was the leader for many years, a success or a failure? And then the whole kind of arc of the nature of the interpretive change sort of is illuminated once you sort of see that it really begins with Smith himself, and then you can allow Smith to be both an actor in the story that you're telling and himself a historian. So by the time that you get to the 19th century, and you can sort of see that really the question of whether Jamestown is a success or a failure is actually a sectional debate. New Englanders want to say, oh no, Jamestown was a failure, because they want Plymouth to be the they want that to be the original American settlement. Plymouth in 1620 was where America began. Jamestown was just a disaster, these northern historians will say. And the Virginia historians will say, no, actually Jamestown was a tremendous success. And it's just sort of fascinating how it just kind of flips and flops, and we still have those kind of sectional tensions in how we tell the story. But at the bottom is the evidence. Remembering too, though, most of the evidence is filtered through John Smith, who had his own particular motivations to tell the story one way or the other. Readers are much more interested in getting to the end of a story than they are at getting to the bottom of an argument. The most readers, I would say. I, for instance, as a reader, am just as interested in getting to the bottom of an argument. I would delightedly read an expository essay that begins with a strong argument and proceeds to defend it with a sequential logical use of evidence, and then offers up a conclusion. A lot of readers, though, especially young people, find that off-putting. Right? Or that's not what they're really looking for in a read. Like, what they wouldn't read for pleasure wouldn't be that. So what they're much more willing to read for pleasure is something that has a plot and has characters. So there's a way of writing history, and it's a very old way of writing history that in many ways academic historians have not done very much for the last few decades, although popular historians just do this very well, is to write history by telling a story that does have plot and characters. What's different then from how I write stories, history as a story, and how popular historians write history as stories, I'm really concerned about making an argument. So what I try to do in these essays is tell an engaging story that has a character and a driving plot, but thread through it the argument that I'm trying to make about how history is written and how we ought to understand this event historically in broader historical terms, so to offer up an interpretation. And the trick of it all then is to make sure not to get to the bottom of the argument before you've got to the end of the story, because you have to hold your reader's attention all the way to the end of the story.